All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our event celebrating Alyssa Coleman's new book. We are so excited to have two authors here today. We have Alyssa Colman and Heather Kassner here in conversation. And they have some amazing questions and thoughtful explorations of the book prepared for you. So I'm just going to introduce them really quick. And then before we get to the conversation, we have a special theatrical reading of the first chapter. So I'm going to start with Heather and then go to Alyssa after, and then we'll get right into that chapter reading. So Heather Kassner is the author of middle grade novels The Bone Garden, Forest of Stars, and The Plentiful Darkness. Her work has been called deliciously on brand with inventive magic, lyrical writing, and that just right creep factor by Kirkus Reviews, and rich and sensuous, brimming with magic, marvels, and the reminder that friendship is a sort of magic all of its own by Booklist magazine. Heather loves thunderstorms, hummingbirds, and books. She lives with her husband in Arizona, waiting and waiting and waiting for the rain, photographing hummingbirds, and reading and writing strange little stories. Her cats are always sure to be curled up nearby. Alyssa Colman is the author of heartwarming stories with a classic feel. Her debut novel, The Gilded Girl, won the 2021 Northern Lights Book Award for middle grade fantasy and earned a starred review from Publishers Weekly, who called it a thoughtful and imaginative exploration of friendship, internal change, and perseverance. Alyssa is here tonight to promote her second novel, The Tarnished Garden, which came out yesterday. A follow-up to The Gilded Girl, follow Izzy's sister Maeve through a new set of challenges, adjusting to a new life together at the Manhattan School for Magic, learning to control Maeve's unpredictable magic, and facing an entirely new threat to magic's existence. Alyssa now lives with her family in Northern Virginia, where she enjoys making messes in her kitchen and hiking with her dog, Daisy. Everyone, please welcome our authors.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Hi.
I'm trying to figure out how to center myself.
Yeah, I know. It's a whole different layout. All right, and now I'm going to bring on the rest of our readers, and we're going to get right into that first chapter live reading.
Hi, everyone. It's been so fun watching your comments appear over on the side. So I have asked a few friends to join me tonight to help me read the first chapter of The Tarnished Garden. Sam from One More Page Books will be playing a role as well, as will Heather. And then we are also joined by fellow middle grade author Lorelei Saverin and her daughter Felicity, who you may remember from when we launched The Gilded Girl last year. She's back to reprise her role as Izzy. And then also joining us is my best friend from high school, Vicky, and her daughter Rosie. And Rosie will be playing the role of Maeve. And both of the mothers will also be joining us playing roles too. So we are going to dive in. Many of you will remember that the first chapter of The Gilded Girl began with the kindling. The first chapter of The Tarnished Garden begins with the snuffing. December 1902, New York City. Maeve hadn't sparked magic yet, but she knew how to effectively disappear. She hurried toward her best hiding spot as the counting began. Though hide and seek was a frequent pastime for the kids on Russ Street, no one ever found her crouched behind the snuffing bucket on the corner. On a cold December day like this, the steam rising from the magically warmed water was either too much of a threat or a promise of snuffed magic for anyone to get too close. But for Maeve, there was no better place to hide. Jimmy Pickett counted loudly behind her. 28, 29. Maeve had until the count of 50 to get to her spot, but she couldn't risk running on the slick, frozen pavement. The tread was nearly gone from her two big boots, and rags stuffed into the toes poked out through the holes. She ducked around a display of half-frozen turnips in front of Murphy's Grocery. A glance behind revealed a handful of kids fanning out to their hiding spots along Russ Street. A hand shot out from behind the turnip display and grabbed Maeve's skirt.
Hide with me,
her older sister Izzy said as she tugged Maeve down next to her. Their knees knocked together, but the thick stockings that Ma'am had knit protected them from pain. The street vendor on the curb leaned over his pushcart full of men's hats.
Well, if it isn't the O'Donnell sisters.
Maeve put her index finger to her lips.
Don't tell anyone we're here, Mr. Green.
Their downstairs neighbor didn't take the hint.
I didn't know Murphy's was getting in a shipment of red hair and freckles this morning.
He put his hands on his hips and laughed at his own joke. Fortunately, 2 women with shopping baskets came over to browse the hats, and Mr. Green shifted his attention to bargaining with them.
Ready or not, here I come.
Jimmy Pickett had the loudest voice in the Tarnish. Maeve looked out at the street.
We're too exposed here.
She hesitated. Did she dare reveal the best hiding place? Or Izzy? She decided she would.
Come on, I know a better place to hide.
Stay with me.
Izzy swept her hand to indicate the bustle in front of them.
We get to be entertained by everything happening here. Besides, hide and seek is for little kids, and I get bored.
Jimmy's 12 and he still plays.
Maeve pointed out. Her older sister rolled her eyes. At 8 years old, Izzy fancied herself very grown up. Too grown up, Ma'am often said with an exasperated shake of her head. But Maeve was 6, and not only did she want to play, she wanted to win. She could see the corner with her stuffing bucket hiding from right here. Right behind it, there was a little cranny in the wall that perfectly fit one small for her age girl. Maeve bit her lip, torn between staying with her sister, her favorite person in the whole world, and moving on to the best hiding spot in the whole world. Down the block, Jimmy shouted. Maeve tensed. He'd probably found Josie Kern. Everyone always found Josie first because of the bright blue coat she'd received from some uptown charity. It was the kind of color that either came from money or magic, and it stuck out in the Tarnish. A breeze whistled down the street, tugging at shawls. A strand of Izzy's hair blew across Maeve's face, casting the busy street in a rosy hue. Maeve pushed the hair out of her face.
Izzy, we should...
But Izzy's attention was on the tiny gold sparks dancing between her fingertips. Maeve's eyes widened at the sight of her sister's magic. Even a year after Izzy had started sparking, Maeve still hadn't gotten used to seeing it.
It's the kindling winds.
Izzy said in a reverent tone. As if to prove her point, a second and stronger gust whooshed down the block, flinging icicles from awnings and sending ladies' skirts swinging. Jimmy shouted again, but it wasn't a cry of triumph. Mr. Green glanced away from his customers. Lines of worry appeared on his dark brown forehead.
Jimmy Pickett's ignited.
Come on.
Izzy stood up. She grabbed Maeve's hand and pulled her to her feet.
Let's go watch.
Maeve knew that 12-year-old's magic either snuffed or kindled when the winds began to blow, and then no one in this neighborhood knew the secrets of kindling. But she'd never witnessed a snuffing before. Down the block, there was a thin pillar of black smoke above the dark-haired, blue-eyed Jimmy Pickett. He stood in the middle of the street and stared at the rings of flame around his wrists. Izzy gasped with awe, but Maeve felt sick to her stomach. She and Izzy had pretended they were kindling so many times, but Maeve had never fully understood that when the winds blew, she would be on fire.
It's beautiful,
Izzy whispered.
It's terrifying.
Maeve thought.
Clear the way to the bucket for the lad.
Mr. Green shouted. His customers clutched their baskets and stepped aside. But Jimmy wasn't headed toward the bucket. Instead, he swung his arms through the air.
He's going to try and kindle his magic,
Izzy said right before the people around them started shouting. As Jimmy pumped his arms, the flames grew into whirls as big as barrel hoops, and the crowd that had gathered stepped back, forming a circle around him.
Does he know how to kindle or is he making it up?
Maeve's knuckles were white from clutching her hands together so hard. Neither sister could take her eyes off the flames.
Don't know.
Izzy whispered.
Maybe he's an ember.
Maeve recoiled.
Man says the Ember Society is not real.
The skin of Jimmy's fingertips had reddened like he'd touched a hot stove. He coughed and smoke came out of his mouth.
Get to the bucket, boy.
Mrs. Murphy shouted from the front door of the grocer's.
The longer you wait, the worse the burning gets.
I don't want to snuff. I love my magic too much,
Jimmy said through gritted teeth. Maeve watched and wished the world was a different place, one where love didn't have to hurt so much. She whimpered. Izzy's face softened and she wrapped her arms around her little sister. The crowd rippled as someone pushed their way through. It was Jimmy's father, with a snuffing bucket tucked under his arm. The water sloshed as Mr. Pickett held out the bucket.
It's time, son. I know it ain't fair, but neither's the world.
The girls clung to each other.
There you two are.
Das said, and Maeve felt his hand on her shoulder. He gently spun his daughters around, and Maeve looked up at his bright red beard and worried eyes.
You're too young to see this.
But I want to watch.
Izzy protested. Behind them, there was a splash and a sizzle. Maeve felt nauseated, and she was thankful when Dad led them to where Mam was waiting on the outskirts of the crowd. Their mother must have run downstairs in a hurry because she wasn't wearing her shawl. Mam put her arm around the girls' shoulders and gave them a quick squeeze.
It's scary, I know. As long as we have each other, we'll be all right.
Maeve's mind raced as she and Izzy followed their parents toward the front door of their tenement building. Izzy would suffer that horrible burning when she was 12, and what happened to Maeve not long after that. Behind them, she heard Jimmy's dad consoling him. The ghost of flames still danced a sickening green in Maeve's vision when she blinked.
That's never going to happen to me.
Izzy whispered to Maeve.
Me neither.
Maeve agreed, relief pouring out of her like a too long-held sigh.
Yeah, when we kindle, we'll do it right.
Izzy said. Maeve slipped on a patch of ice and fell. She was too stunned for it to hurt. How could Izzy see things so differently?
You all right?
Izzy offered Maeve a hand up. Gold sparks flickered at her fingertips. Maeve stared at the hand, but she didn't take it. How could Izzy want to kindle after what they just witnessed? Could magic ever be worth going through that? Maeve burst into tears.
Oh, Mavers, let's go inside.
Daz said, scooping her up. She wrapped her arms around Daz's neck and pressed her face against the boiled wool of his coat to block out the world. Maeve thought again of her hiding spot. When the kindling winds blew for her, she'd head straight for the bucket, even if she had to do it on her own. And that is the first chapter of The Tarnished Garden. Thank you so much to Lorelai and Felicity and to Rosie and Vicky for being with us tonight. You have made this evening so special already. I am so honored to have you with us. Thank you.
All right, we are going to transition into the conversation part of our evening, but first let's get a round of applause for all our amazing actors. And I will bid you all adieu for now. I'm going to be lurking in the comments section and writing down any questions y'all might have for our authors at the end of this talk here today. So go ahead and put those in the comments. And I will see y'all in a little bit. All right, and
hey.
Hi. It's just the two of us in our big heads now. Alyssa, I'm so happy to be with you here today. And I think that, I think everyone after just hearing that first chapter is already going to go snatch up the book if they already haven't. That was really fun. I love that.
Thank you. Yeah, we did that for the Gilded Girl last year and it was so much fun. I said, we have to do it again.
And thanks for letting me take part. I like to, I never get to act.
Debut, yes.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to first say, I devoured your book. It was so good. And I knew it would be because obviously after I read The Gilded Girl, I had, expectations up here and this just surpassed it too, because you just built on it and you just made everything fun and magical and just so exciting and also sweet because the sister relationship just was like one of my favorite parts. So I wanted to ask you though about all things bookish.
Okay.
Because I know, for example, that The Gilded Girl was a retelling of The Little Princess. And so The Tarnished Garden was also a retelling, this one of The Secret Garden.
Yes.
So I just wanted to know kind of what sparked the heart of that story and how did you choose which stories to retell?
Well, for me, A Little Princess was always one of my favorites. And I loved it growing up. I have keen memories of doing monologues from it in my acting class. And so that, to me, when I set out to do a retelling, I wanted to tell a story about a girl who had everything and then lost it. And The Gilded Girl built out of that idea. Yes, The Gilded Girl. Right. It's off screen, but it's on the table. And then I have The Tarnished Garden. A lot of people don't realize this, but Frances Hodgson Burnett wrote A Little Princess, and she also wrote The Secret Garden. So when my publisher asked me to do a companion or a sequel novel, I thought, well, that seems a natural parallel to do another one of her stories and to somehow tie them together. And I also really like The Secret Garden. But I will say, when I set out to do it, I listened to the audiobook and I had forgotten that there is a lot of material in there that doesn't quite fit into our modern world. There's a lot of colonialism in that story. And so I wanted to write something that felt fresh, but still harkened back to that novel, to the parts of the novel that I love.
I love that. And so what stage in the process did you actually know that you were going to write this? Like, was the Gilded Girl complete, or did you have, chance to like, okay, I can put this in the Gilded Girl and know it's going to carry over to the Tarnished Garden?
No, the Gilded Girl was complete before I even started this draft. I mean,
Okay.
I think I had copy edits that I could slip things into, but I turned in the final draft of this before the Gilded Girl even came out. I turned in copy edits for this book, meaning that they had gone through and checked all my commas and they had checked all my lettering and made sure I used the right words in the right spots. I turned those in 2 days after the Gilded Girl came out. So it was a very fast turnaround. So I didn't have a lot of time to make changes.
Okay.
Yeah, especially after I started hearing from people. There were a couple things I wish I could have worked into the book. I really wish I could have worked in Olive, Emma's cat from the first book. Yes, she does find him, but I did not get a chance to work him into the second book, though I would have loved to, because a lot of people have asked me about him.
I see. But the thing is, we don't know that anything's missing, really, because it's just so complete the way that it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I know, like, yeah, it's like with a Gilded Girl, we had Emma and we had Izzy. And so in the Tarnished Garden, we get to see Izzy again, but with her sister Maeve. And sister stories, like I said, are some of my very favorite. So what drew you to writing these two in particular, the sisters in this story?
The sisters in this story, I wanted to write, well, first of all, I love my sister. She's one of my favorite people. Because I wrote this during 2020, during the pandemic, and we were actually spending a lot of time together then, and it was lovely. And I was getting to know her as a person in a different way. We were living nearby each other. I was seeing her. She was coming to babysit my girls because we were part of the same very small pandemic bubble. Mm-hmm. And so I was really getting to know her in a new way. And I drew some inspiration from that how do you get to know your sister as a person, someone you always thought you knew, that you had put ideas into your head about what they were like. And then when you spend time with them and you realize these ideas were actually wrong, and you have to learn to love this person that your sister really is and not the person you expected her to be. So a lot of the story grew from that. And I didn't have the same struggle with learning to love my sister that the girls do in this book, but I also didn't have the same absence that they do. They've been apart for 2 years, and I think and when you've been apart for someone, as some kids may be seeing their friends for the first time in 2 years right now, and their friends may have grown and changed, and you have to learn each other all over again and get to know each other as new people.
And I think that that's one thing that really worked so well with this too, is because we got to see each of their perspectives. We could be in their head, and it wasn't just like, oh, this is, one person's perspective of their relationship. It was from both of their sides, and it was really, really well balanced too.
Thank you. Yeah, that's important to me, to tell both sides of the story. I'm a little getting over a cold, so if I sound a little funny or if I keep pausing to drink or blow my nose, I apologize.
Perfect. Did your sister read this yet?
I don't think she's read it yet. No,
I
don't think I think her copy may be getting there today or tomorrow.
Well, she's in for a treat.
Aww.
So at the beginning, you mentioned that like the Gilded Girl started with the kindling, and then when we start the Tarnished Garden, it begins with the snuffing. And so you have these like magical elements, and also something that you introduce here called like the searing. So how did you come up with all of these kind of different magical, I guess, just different magical things?
Well, originally, the idea for kindling came from something that English teachers teach their students to do, and the young people in the audience may be doing this in their English classes right now. I drew a word cloud where I wrote magic as fire, and then I drew a little cloud around it because it was a word cloud, and I started drawing lines and writing different words for magic off my word cloud. And kindling was one of the words. And when I reached that, I thought, ooh, that's interesting. And I kept going. And so when I went to write this book, I knew that Izzy had to be mastering a new element of magic. She couldn't suddenly just have her magic and everything was great and it was perfect and she could do whatever she wanted. I really wanted there to be a more adult level of magic that she needed to get a hang of and she was struggling with. So I went back to that original chart, and which was in the front of my Gilded Girl notebook, because I keep a handwritten notebook for every project.
You are so organized.
I write better. I think better analog. I really do. And so I went back to that project notebook, and one of the words in there that I'd written at the time was seer. And so I came up with the idea that when you kindle and change something, your magic has permanence, but you have to perform this searing, which is described in the book as it's like tying a knot in the magic to keep it from unraveling. And all of the adults tell her, oh, don't worry, you'll get the hang of it. You won't even notice you're doing it after a time. But to Izzy, it's a big challenge learning to get the hang of it. And she has a few hang-ups that are, and some mental roadblocks that are getting in her way.
And I think that that's one thing that comes across too a lot is just the visuals that you have of these things. So like the kindling and the fire and then the snuffing in the buckets, and it's so emotional. So it just draws the reader in and is like flipping the pages. We got to see what happens next. So it was good. And kind of along those lines, not only is the magic like bigger than life, but the characters are too. You create really, really memorable characters. So obviously Izzy and Maeve, but also Avi, who you introduce in this book, and then Emma, who is in The Gilded Girl. And so I just wanted to ask you, do you have a favorite character?
Oh, gosh. I mean, for me, a favorite character tends to be whoever's easiest to write.
I don't blame you.
Because when they show up, the scene just goes, just bursts into life. And for me, that's the house dragging figgy pudding. Whenever Figgy shows up, I have to actually actively work to keep him from taking over a scene, because he knows everything. He's got an opinion about everything. He does ridiculous things. So he gets some of my favorite lines in both books, actually.
He needs to have like a little novella or something like that, like just his own, because I think he'd appreciate that too, and he put it in the library.
Oh, he would be absolutely honored to have his own novella.
I think he would almost expect it.
The figgy pudding origin story.
Yes. Well, and that kind of leads into my next question, because he was so memorable. And I wrote down a line that you had written in this book, which is, house dragons do not shed. We honor you with our fur. And so, I mean, he just brings me so much joy when I read him. And in fact, my printer died today. And so I had to go print off my questions. And when I went to like the UPS store to print it out, the woman behind the counter was like, did I just see figgy pudding? Like, of all the things on this thing, she's like, figgy pudding. I'm like, let me tell you about my friend's book. So anyways, but it was adorable. And that tells you like his name even just jumps off the page.
He was figgy pudding from day one. I don't even know how I came up with it. He burst into my head fully formed and named.
Well, and you know what I love though is because you have, like, you can see on the cover here, you've introduced some more little house dragon kits.
Yeah.
And they were just, I mean, obviously, as Sam said in my bio, I'm always with my cats curled up. So these are like some of my favorite characters too. And I just wanted to know like how much fun you had writing them and how did you come up with their different personalities?
I had a lot of fun writing them. So in the very first draft of this book, there was only one house dragon kitten. And she had so much personality that I had to split her into 3 because it was too much for one cat to contain. And also I wanted the cats to parallel the sibling story that was happening with Maeve and Izzy. I wanted to show these 3 cats that could not bear to be separated. And these 2 girls that had been separated and were trying to work their way back together. But I had a lot of fun with them. Their names are, let's see. It's opposite the way I'm in. Cadenza is the calico. And then we have Trouble is the gray, and excuse me, my voice. Forte is the orange tabby. So their family guards the opera house. So I had a lot of fun playing with musical terms with them and trying to figure out the right balance of their personalities. And their personalities, I think, are very distinct in terms of what they like and how the power balance between the three of them.
Yes, and how they like tease each other and protect each other. It was just fun. You just saw the whole spectrum of that.
I got to watch a lot of kitten videos as research for those characters, which I highly recommend writing kittens in your book, because then you get to watch kitten videos.
I think that's note to self, right? That's always the fun stuff, because otherwise research can be kind of hard. Although I think, knowing you, I know that you do like research a lot.
I love research.
So that also leads into my next question, because your stories are historical fantasy. So obviously you can write what you want with fantasy, and you've come up with the great terms we talked about earlier. But how do you go about world building when you're trying to balance like the fantasy with history?
Well, it was really important to me that all of the historical details in the book are accurate with a layer of magic over them. So I might say that in the Gilded Girl, I might say that they're building they go to visit the site where they're building the library on 42nd Street. Accurate. I looked up floor plans to what level that construction was at the time they would have been there, even though it's a one-line reference. I got my copy editor on the first book, Chandra, who is amazing, and I got into a battle in the comments section about how long it would take Emma to walk to the dressmaker shop from the, and we went back and forth, and I finally sent a friend who lived in New York to walk the route and time it so that we could get it accurate. So the historical details are actually very accurate as to New York City. I went and I did a couple tours with the Tenement Museum in New York, which I highly recommend. They do virtual tours if you're not in New York and you can't go, that are really lovely. So I did a couple of those and was able to ask questions of the tour guide. And before the pandemic hit, I was able to visit there in person and walk through the tenement. So much of the tenement in the book is actually based on the museum that I was able to visit and see firsthand. So I love doing that. And then, the great thing about writing fantasy is whenever there's something you can't quite explain, you just say, well, magic. How are they going to get a message uptown? Well, let me figure out how I can do that with magic, since they don't necessarily have phones yet.
So you're having fun with it too. It sounds like both sides of it. I love that. And I think that it's just really exciting, because you talked about, tell me if I have the term right, but magitecture. Okay, I love that. Just the combination of magic with the architecture too. And so it sounds like you could design the buildings as you wanted, but you also had ones that were there, obviously, from the history when you're having them walk to certain specific places. So.
Yeah, like the buildings, there's buildings that are mentioned in the Tarnished Garden, like the Dakota is a real place. You could actually walk past it on the street in New York City. It's still an apartment building to this day. It's had a very interesting history, but it's fun to then explain how these buildings came about with magic and how Emma's father might have been a part of them.
Right. And I'm sure that those magical schools, the schools are there too, right? For sure. Okay.
All of the schools the locations that are specified are actual schools.
Oh, they are schools. Okay.
They are schools. If you go on Google Maps, they're schools. They're not They're not as I described them, but we can assume that they might have been 100 years ago. Yes.
I love that. And you kind of talked about the tenement buildings and also the opera house and the different kinds of locations that were there. And so, and you're in talking about history, your story brings in things that are very relevant historically and now in terms of poverty and wealth and privilege. And so I just wanted to ask, how important was that to you to discuss in your books?
I think it's very important. I think that those are issues. One of the things that drew me to setting it up setting these stories in the Gilded Age is the parallel to things that we're struggling with today. I saw so much in the tech barons and the railroad barons and the people who had these mansions on Fifth Avenue during the Gilded Age, that I saw so much of the parallels to today. And I thought, these are things we're still grappling with, that we still haven't solved. And I think it's important for kids to see how long these struggles we've been dealing with them, because I think it gives context to the fact that we need to figure this out, because this is still going on. This isn't a new problem, this unequal distribution of wealth, which I decided to make tangible with magic in the books. Sorry, 1 second. Excuse me, I'm sorry. I was losing my voice there. But yeah, it was very important for me to make that parallel between the modern and the historical.
And I think that came across just really, like, it was woven in. You could tell that was like part of the heart of the story. Obviously, you're wrapping around magic and all of these things like around it, but it felt just so genuine and heartfelt. And I think that's one thing that your books do really, really well, though, is they do touch your heart, because they're warm and thoughtful, well written, and fun. Like, you just combine everything really, really well together. So I told you I was going to have to gush, so I'm just going to slip it in between my questions. We're celebrating you today, so you have to hear all the good things.
Compliments.
I know. All right, well, then I'll ask you a hard question now. So, I mean, so I'm not like just saying all the good stuff, but it's not too hard. My books have all been standalones, but I heard that writing a second book in a series comes with its own kind of challenges. So would you like to share? Was it like just a piece of cake, the easiest thing in the world, or was it kind of more challenging than that?
Definitely more challenging than that, because I set up expectations and rules when I wrote The Gilded Girl, and I had to stick to them. That book was already out in the world and it was going into print, and I couldn't go back and change those rules. So there were things that I had to go through, and there were names I'd already used that I was like, oh, drat, I would have used that in a different way. And figgy pudding, like it's fun because I was able to expand on the magic, but I'm trying to remember, there was at least one thing where I wanted him to do something. I was like, oh no, I said magic can't affect people. I can't do that. So I had to go back, and it affected the plotting because I had to make sure that I followed the rules I'd already set up. But in a way, it was really fun too. I really loved being able to say, okay, well, Izzy in the first book, she loves finery, and she loves pretending she's the great lady who owns the house. And that was something that's mentioned frequently in the book, but not something I really got to explore. So I really loved that in the Tarnished Garden, we get to see the side of Izzy who really does like fancy things, and she likes things to be nice, and she likes things to be tidy, and she wants to be a part of the society that she's been serving for so long now. So I really liked that I got to explore different sides of the characters.
And did you miss writing Emma at all? I mean, I know she was still in the story, but not from her perspective this time.
It's fascinating. Izzy and Maeve's voices both came really naturally to me. I didn't have such a struggle with either of them. Emma was actually very challenging to write in the first book. It took several drafts before I got her voice right. So I did miss writing her. I did miss seeing things through her head. In the first draft, there were actually a couple of Emma chapters scattered throughout the book. But ultimately, I decided that it was distracting from the sisters and was pulling away from their story. And I realized that I could do everything I needed with Emma through their perspectives. So she's still a huge part of the story. Those Emma fans, do not worry. She is front and center. She is right there. But yeah, it's very... No, I didn't miss it. I deeply loved writing Maeve so much that it felt natural to be in her voice.
I love that, because I was like, I did love, obviously, Emma too so much, but you're right, you did have her in the story and had an essential part in the story too. So to see the new relationship as Maeve and Emma also got to know each other, I don't know, that was one of my favorite parts to read about. So
Yeah.
and also with obviously Mr. Harris who's in it. And,
Yes, it's fun to get to know him better too, because he was gone for all of the Gilded Girl after chapter 3.
he's such a good dad. So I will
Yes.
say no more about him, but I loved his role and how you wrapped that thread up that I will not speak of. So no spoilers, right? And I think kind of when you're talking about writing your characters and maybe that the sisters, their voices, Izzy and Maeve, came to you more easily than Emma's did. No matter what though, you still have such a really good, strong middle grade voice. So what kind of drew you to writing middle grade, and are there any other age groups that you're interested in writing for?
Yeah, I love middle grade. I love reading middle grade. It gives me so much faith in the world, that there's so much hope in it. I just love the characters. I moved cross country when I was in 6th grade, and it was such a culture shock. I moved from California to central New Jersey, and I have so many vivid memories of being 11, 12, 13. I remember middle school better than I remember high school, even though I lived it later. And I think because it's such a vulnerable time in your life, I think you're going through a lot of changes. I think socially, there's a lot of changes that happen in middle school too. And academically, there's a lot that happens. And I wanted to write about those years because I could so easily step back and remember 11-year-old Alyssa. And so I love writing for middle grade because I still can viscerally feel what it's like to be that age group. And I just love the type of stories that get told in middle grade. I love the community of authors that I meet in middle grade. I'd love to try writing an adult novel at some point, probably historical, because that's what I reach for when I reach for adult novels. So that would be a lot of fun one day.
Well, I look forward to that very much. So I know that will, that's going to be a nice researched novel. Any magic in this perhaps, or too far away to even think about?
Too far away to think about yet. Yeah, I have the spark of an idea, but I haven't explored it yet.
Well, give us all the middle grade in the meantime, because we can't have enough.
Thank you. I'm working on it.
Yeah, and the middle grade is so fun. I think everything you said is so true, though. Just the wonder you felt when you're that age and things like that. It's just, to put that in a book then. Oh, hi. Oh.
Just popping in to say hi.
Okay. Well, one other thing I wanted to ask is about the covers of your book, because they're obviously both beautiful and they pair so well together. So I just wanted to ask, who's the illustrator and what was the process to having these kind of covers come about?
Yeah, so the artist is Genevieve Gable. She is a French-Canadian artist. She does beautiful illustrations. She's done a couple of picture books. She's probably best known for her Anne of Green Gables books that recently came out. She's done some illustrated Anne of Green Gables picture books. And my publisher sent me a link to her Instagram and said, "This is who we're thinking about. What do you think?" And I can no longer even tell you what I had been imagining for the cover, because as soon as I saw her artwork, I just, everything changed, and I said, yes, I love it. So she did a sketch for the Gilded Girl, and I was like, being new author, I was like, can I give her a few notes? There's some historical details that aren't quite right.
I love that.
She was very open to it. So I sent her some pictures. Izzy's maid outfit was just was very Victorian, and I wanted it to be more Edwardian, which is a few years difference, but this is much more how it's described in the book. We asked her to have Figgy looking at the reader instead of away, which he was in the first sketch, and just some notes about their clothes and the skyline. And she took the notes so beautifully. So when she agreed to do the cover for the Tarnished Garden, she reached out right away and said, "Does Alyssa have photographs?" So I sent her pictures of Maeve's. I sent her like a picture of what Maeve's outfit would look like, and her hair, how her hair might look. And she did such a beautiful job. She got all the colors. She even got the cat colors right. I didn't have to tell her that. She read the book and she did it. It was her idea to put Avi. I don't know if people have noticed yet. I keep moving things the wrong way. But there's a secret character lurking up here in the fire escape in the background. But it was her idea to put Avi up there watching, and I really just, when I saw the cover, my heart leapt because it's so perfect.
Well, there's just so many things to see. You just notice, like the more you look, you just notice all these things. I was telling my husband last night when I was just showing him the cover, and I'm like, I would have loved this when I was a little girl. I'm like, I love it now, but I mean, it's just perfect, and it just represents the story so well.
Like I'm actually just noticing now that there are some leaves back here that Maeve has yet to revive with her magic.
Oh yeah.
I hadn't even noticed that until right now.
It's never ending. And then the back too is like super cute.
Yeah, I love the you get to see the house dragons up close.
Yes.
And then Forte's on the spine as well.
I love Forte.
He's brave and strong.
He is. And I just have one last question for you, if there's other questions to ask, because I don't want to like hog all of your time. But you talked earlier about, some other middle grade you're working on. Is there anything that you can share that you're working on?
I am currently working on 2 middle grade projects. As with publishing, I'm not allowed to share any of it yet, but I'm really hopeful that I'll be able to share more details with that soon.
Well, we look forward to it very, very, very much.
Thank you.
I didn't know if Sam was going to come back with questions, or you want me to look at them. Oh, there
Yes, I have returned. I am going to just change our layout a little bit so it's not just our floating heads.
Hey,
there we go.
I'm just going to shut these blinds. I'll be right back.
All right, wonderful. So you did have a question earlier, and I think you touched on it. But if you want to elaborate on it at all, it was about whether or not it was hard to come up with Maeve's voice in this book. And maybe if you wanted to take this opportunity to talk about some of her idiosyncrasies that set her apart from her sister and from Emma from the first one. And that question was from Kathleen Schaefer.
So thanks, Kathleen. Hi. With Maeve's voice, it's, for me, a lot of writing the characters is about their frame of reference. So you may have noticed in the Gilded Girl, Emma likens a lot of things to jewels and gold and fancy. She describes things as silk and the things she's used to. And actually, as the book progresses, you'll notice more and more she's using cleaning terms, and she's describing the rough wools of things, and the voice slips into her new role, whereas Izzy, her, in the first book, her thoughts burst like soap bubbles, and so it's much more that she uses those cleaning terms at the beginning, and she begins to use more magical terms to relate things as the book goes on. For Maeve, very much a lot of it was the way she thinks of things are related to her time out west. So I pulled, there's a running theme of this incident she was involved in her time out west, where she was attacked by a bull after a prank gone wrong. And so she wasn't seriously injured, but she was injured in this. And so a lot of times she'll things will make her leg twinge where she broke it during that, or she'll think back to the bull and the way it made her feel. So a lot of writing the voice for me is kind of framing the character's point of view and reference. I'm also weird in that I listen to different music for each character. And I think it helps affect the cadence and the flow of their speech. So for Emma, I listened to a playlist that was on Spotify that I found called Jane Austen movie music. And it's all just soundtracks from Jane Austen movies. Izzy was Irish jigs that I listened to for that. And then Maeve, I actually listened to the soundtrack to a movie I've never seen called Flicka. I think it's a Disney movie. And for some reason, when I listened to that soundtrack, I was like, this is Maeve's voice. And so I would just listen to that soundtrack on repeat. And I wrote her chapters.
That's so funny. I have actually seen Flicka, although it's been many, many years.
I know it's about a horse, and that's as much
Yes.
as I know.
That's about what I remember as well.
Yeah.
I think it was a brown horse, but it might have been a black horse.
I knew I told you that. Yeah.
Yeah. What an interesting insight to your writing process. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Happy to share.
Is there a specific scene in the book that you feel was your favorite to write, and maybe one that was the most difficult to write?
I really love the scene I had the most fun writing is the scene where Izzy is they're all in the kitchen and people keep coming and going, and Izzy is there trying to magic these lumps of dough into bread for dinner, and she keeps getting distracted and the loaves keep turning back into dough, and she's getting super frustrated, and Figgy is there being his most figginess and giving advice that she doesn't exactly want, and Tom and Emma come in, and it's such a fun scene because there's so much activity, and I just love the visual of every time Izzy gets frustrated, these bread just go boom, right back into dough. So I really loved writing that scene. It was originally a much longer scene because I had far too much time writing it and I had to cut it down.
Well, when you're talking about that, do you revise? Like, I mean, how do you revise? How do you go about that process to know what you want to cut?
I mean, that scene was like,
you knew that one was obvious, but like in general,
but
tell us about your organizational like magic. Because I'm in awe of that. You know me.
I have a very detailed note card system that I use to revise. I should do a whole blog post about this because people ask me about it all the time. But I have a color-coded system of notes that I use. I count my words in each chapter to make sure I'm trying to keep them flowing in a certain way, so that one chapter isn't super chunky while another's super light. But as I revise, I sit down each day, and what I usually do to start my writing is I go back and read what I wrote the day before. And to get me into the flow, I will revise what I wrote the day before. And then naturally, I just start writing from there. So it's funny, the end of my book is usually what's the least revised because I haven't combed through it over and over as I read. But that way, it's almost like squishing stuff out of a toothpaste tube. I just do a little bit, pushing further and further every day.
That's a good process. But yes, let's look for that blog post, please. Everybody needs help with revising it. Maybe I'm just speaking for myself.
I love revising. It's my first draft. I make terrible noises when I draft. I'm just like, oh, get the story out.
You prefer revising and I prefer drafting. But when we did that other panel, we always found all of our
we were opposites in so many ways, and yet we're good friends.
Yes.
Wow. Yeah. That's so interesting that you do prefer or you enjoy revising, because I know for some writers it can be a bit of a drag, but when your book is so full of magic and inquisitive, fun little dragon cats, I'm sure you just want to read it again and again, as all of us watching here today will as well.
Thank you.
I know that you can't speak to your current projects, but can you tell us whether or not you're done with the world of Gilded Girl and Tarnished Garden, or if there's perhaps another retelling in the future?
I have not been given any official word on whether there will be more books. I have not been told there won't be. I've heard that they want to wait and see how this book does. So the more copies you buy, the more likely there will be another book. But I would love to go back. I would really love to write a book set out west when Maeve's out west, and follow her out there. I'd love to keep going in New York and see what happens. I can't spoil the end of this one. Nobody's read it yet. But yes, there is more to come at the end of this book that could launch a next one. I left it open-ended in the hopes that maybe we will get another one.
I didn't want to give spoilers, but you had so many like fun scenes in there that I just want to talk about it with somebody. So everybody needs
We
to
can talk
read
tomorrow offline.
Okay.
Do we have any more questions from the audience?
I think that was it from the chat. It's mostly just people talking about how beautiful your writing is and how excited they are to get this book and how much they love the house dragons and the sister relationship as well.
Well, I have a question too. I have another one. I mean, I could just ask you a million questions. I just didn't want to hog, but I wanted to know, like, what would you give to anybody in this group who is maybe writing or wants to write and maybe just needs like some words of encouragement or some suggestions on what helps you get through and finish a first draft or a second draft or
Yeah, I think the best advice that I can give to anyone who wants to write is to read, because by reading you are learning how to put a story together. So beyond reading, my even better advice is to reread. When you love a book, go back and reread it, because the first time you read it through, you're loving it and you want to see what happens. Second time, reread it to see how the author did it. Go back in and look for those clues you missed. Read over the paragraphs over and over that you find beautiful. I love to reread in audiobooks because it makes me listen to the story in a different way. And I'm actually, when I listen to audiobooks, I'm much more aware of sentences and how things flow and are put together. So I love to, I find I learn so much from rereading. I mean, The Gilded Girl came out of listening to an audiobook as I was rereading A Little Princess, and I had the thought, oh, Sarah Crew would be so annoying to go to school with because she's so perfect. And suddenly I had the idea for a story and I had Izzy's voice in my head. So you never know where you're going to get your ideas from. Reading teaches you and it sparks growth within your brain. And the other advice I would offer to anyone who wants to write is to practice writing when you don't feel like doing it. Because if you want to be an author, you will have to sit down and you can't write all of your books whenever you feel inspired to write.
No.
You have to practice coming home and saying, I'm tired. Okay, I'll write 100 words tonight. And often if I tell myself, okay, just sit down and write 100 words. You could do 100 words. That's like a paragraph. You could do it. 100 words often turns into 500 words, turns into 1,000 words. And before I know it, I've gone to bed late again. But I think working on that early in my career before I was published and learning how to work on something and give myself deadlines was really, really helpful. Because, it's like writing a story for school. When do you ever feel like writing a story for school? You don't. So most of the time, unless you have a really brilliant idea that you're going to blow your teacher away, you have to sit down and do it. And a lot of the times it turns out pretty good, even though you didn't feel super inspired to do it. So especially for kids, if you were thinking about wanting to be a writer someday, I highly recommend just practice writing. You don't even have to show it to anybody if you don't want to. Just write stories, have fun with it.
I think that's the best thing, having fun, because sometimes we can just put so much pressure on ourselves and it's like we're forgetting why we're doing it in the first place, right? So we're having fun.
I wrote plays before I started writing books, and there was a great line in playwriting that was, if you're bored, the audience is bored. And so I remember that too. Like, I have to have fun with writing. Like, if I'm not having fun, the scene's not working.
Exactly. There's a clue.
So, yes.
All right, so we actually have 5 questions now because everyone was saving them up for you.
I've been busy.
So from Weasley Cheese on YouTube, we have, how many drafts did the second book have?
Second draft. So I always love to compare this because I think it shows how different it is. For The Gilded Girl, I wrote the first draft in 44 days, and then the second draft took me 6 months. In The Tarnished Garden, the first draft took me 7 months, and then I wrote the second draft in 3 weeks. So writing
Wow.
can be crazy. It's just how different that is. The Tarnished Garden, I did write this during the summer of 2020. So the world was shut down. I had 4-month-old twins that I was juggling while I was writing this. And so there were a lot of other external factors that really slowed me down. But once the story was on paper, I knew exactly how to make it work. So revising it was different. I think in total, it went through 3 drafts, which is pretty small for a book, actually. I think the Gilded Girl went through 5 or 6 drafts.
All right, thank you. And from Sam Farkas on YouTube, what are you reading now / what books are you looking forward to?
I just finished an ARC, which is an advanced reader copy of Hannah Sue and the Ghost Crab Nation by Sylvia Liu. I finished it today. I could not put this book down. This was the kind of book that I was cooking dinner last night and like stirring a pot and reading because I did not want to stop reading it. It comes out later this summer. It is fantastic. It is a high adventure sci-fi set in the future where people are enmeshed into the web. And I just found it fascinating. Her world building is incredible.
All right, thank you. And from Alyssa Wishingrad, also on YouTube, can you talk a little bit about your approach to character development?
Oh gosh, that's how long do we have? No. We need another hour for character development. Yeah, it goes back to what I was saying before about voice, because a lot of the character comes from voice for me and their background and what they've been through. So knowing the character's story is really important to me. For me, this is just one of my idiosyncrasies for big characters. I really struggle to find the character until they have a name. And once they have a name, it just helps me shape everything around them. And then one of my other fun tips for writers too, if you're working on a character, I love taking like the Myers-Briggs type indicator as my character and finding out what type they are and reading the character profile, because I find I often get fun little details that help round them out through the character profiles through Myers-Briggs. But that could just be my corporate background training.
All right. So Jesse Irwin wants to know what some of your favorite writing resources, including books, websites, or podcasts, are.
Oh, Jessie's asking this because she's my mentee from Author Mentor Match right now. Her book is fabulous. I'm so excited to see where it goes. But Jessie, I love writing excuses. As she knows, in almost all my edit letters, I prescribe writing excuses podcast episodes to help work through certain problems. I love Lisa Crone's books about writing. I think that her way of writing and framing, putting a story together based on a character's what ifs and their third rail. You should read that book if you want to understand what that is as a writer. Really, really is wonderful. Those are probably my favorites and my go-tos whenever I start to work on a project.
All right, wonderful. And then our last question, and if you have any more, go ahead and slide those in under the wire. How many maps did you draw for this book while you were drafting? And that's from Shayna Targos.
Hi. Yes, I think I'm getting a reputation for when I give feedback to people, telling them that they have to draw maps and floor plans. I drew a lot. You would not believe how many maps of the garden that I drew for this book to make sure that I didn't have them turning left and then right at the bird bath and to get to certain places. So I had a very detailed map of where each plant was in the garden, so I didn't miss sight where the vegetables were. I drew maps of Avi's apartment. I drew maps of the new school, of each floor of the new school, even the top floor, which we don't even really visit. Yeah, I drew a lot of maps, and then I had my map of the city too to map out where everything was.
All right, perfect. on behalf of One More Page, I just want to thank you both so much, and also our readers earlier, for making it out today and for treating us with such a wonderful conversation about a book that we all cannot wait to get our hands on and read.
Thank you. Thank you so much to Sam and One More Page Books for having me tonight. I had so much fun. And thank you, Heather, for your wonderful questions and for hosting. This was a blast. Let's do it again sometime. Yeah.
We should.
Totally
Same time next
agree.
year.
Sometime next year, exactly. I'm holding you guys to that.
That's
All
great.
right. Bye, everyone. Thank you for coming out.
Thank you all so much for coming.